We had been discussing chapter 25 and we got to this point where we were talking about the demand for money. But I want to just go back a couple of slides. Back to banks creating money. Do a quick recap of that. Clarify what I made confusing last time. Any input that you want to give at this stage that you can think of, though? No? Okay. So we're going to recap this briefly, and if there's a question you want to ask, now's the time to ask it. I mean, while we're going through it, will be the time to ask it. So banks create money. How do they create money? They create money by granting a loan. Why does that create money? Because once they grant a loan, that loan gets redeposited. And money supply is cash plus deposits. So when a loan gets granted and it gets redeposited, deposits go up. Money supply goes up. So banks create money in that sense. Okay? There are a number of things that limit the amount of money that a bank can create. Those things are, number one, desired reserves or required reserves, depending on whether banks want to hold more than just the required reserves. And, sorry, it wasn't number one. Number one was the money base. Number two was the required reserves. There we go. Okay, and then a discussion about why banks would want to hold reserves. Remember, it's costly to hold reserves, but it also is necessary because if people want cash, the bank has to be able to give them cash. So what happens in the money creation process? If money is inserted into the economy, how might money be inserted into the economy? Well, the Reserve Bank, for example, could just print cash, notes and coins. If the Reserve Bank prints money and it uses that money to... Well, it can inject it in any number of ways, but one way in which it could inject that money is to buy government bonds from the public or buy government bonds from the banking system. Or the ridiculous suggestion that was made was just a helicopter drop of money. So the Reserve Bank just kind of, flies over and just drops money. It's one way of stimulating the economy. It hasn't been done yet, but that's the discussion. Anyway, so they could helicopter drop money onto the economy or into the country to stimulate the economy. What would end up happening? Banks would end up holding excess reserves. So people, as soon as that cash enters the economy, people deposit that cash. Once they've deposited that cash, the banks hold excess reserves. In other words, they hold more reserves of cash than what they want to hold. If they hold excess reserves, what do they do with that extra cash? They lend it out. When they lend it out, the quantity of money increases. How does the quantity of money increase? Well, it either goes into circulation or it gets redeposited. Once new deposits are made, well, as it says, some money will remain on deposit, some will just stay floating around in the economy. Once new deposits are made, some of that new deposit will be kept on reserve, some of that new deposit will be excess, and then banks will lend that excess reserve once again, and then that starts this whole circular process over again. So the circular process gets smaller and smaller. Initially we have an increase of 100,000. That leads to another increase of 66,000, which leads to another increase of 40,000, which leads to another increase, and it gets smaller and smaller, and what we end up with is a geometric sequence. And the sum of a geometric sequence we can summarize as the initial increase in money times 1 minus an L being the amount that is redeposited, so the percentage redeposited. So 1 minus the percentage redeposited, and the initial amount divided by that gives us the total amount of money that will be created. So the thing called the money multiplier says, well, if we take the deposits, the ratio, if we take the number of deposits and the amount of cash, and we divide it by the reserves and the amount of cash, and we take this entire equation here and we just make it much simpler by dividing everything by deposits, in which case we have the value of deposits normalized to 1 divided by, plus the amount of cash as a ratio to deposits divided by reserves to deposits plus cash to deposits. Then we get this thing called the money multiplier. And what I mentioned to you last week, but which I had sort of messed up the description a bit, and I couldn't work out why, and then eventually I did figure out why, was just if the amount of cash that you have is 0, so if there's no currency drainage ratio, then your deposit ratio is simply 1. Okay? In which case your money multiplier, we can cross off these things here in this equation, and we end up with 1 divided by R over D, and D just takes the value of 1. So 1 divided by R over 1 is 1 over R. So the money multiplier just becomes 1 over R. Yeah?
I was going to ask, if you're not given the multiplier,
yes.
is it possible to calculate the reserve ratio?
Yeah, if you're given enough information, you could. So if there's some sort of statement within the question that implies there's a reserve ratio, you could calculate the money multiplier.
Yeah, you can do that, like calculate the reserve ratio.
Yeah. Yeah, like I say, if there's information that doesn't give you directly what the reserve ratio is, but from the information there's an implication of what the reserve ratio is, then you would calculate the reserve ratio, and then from that you could calculate the money multiplier. Alternatively, you could be told, for example, 10,000 was initially deposited, and at the end of the whole process, there's 50,000. What's the multiplier? Yeah. Okay. So we did look at a question then concerning the banking system's ability to create money. There was some reserves that were held. It was above what was required given our reserve ratio, so there were excess reserves. Those excess reserves were lent out and money was created. Do you want to go through this question again quickly? Yeah? Okay. So just quickly, just as a recap, suppose the simplified consolidated balance sheet is shown below. This is your reserve ratio. It's 20%. Here are your figures. The question asks, what is the value of excess reserves in the commercial banking system? So we know that if we've got 72, that's our total reserves, okay, currently. What is our required reserves? Our required reserves, we've got a reserve ratio of 20%. Our required reserves is 20% of 240, which was our calculation, 220, sorry, which is our calculation here. Our required reserves are 44. So if we've got 72 as our reserves and our required reserves are 44, then our excess reserves, 72 minus 44 is 28. So what can the banking system do? It can lend out that extra 28, then that's going to get redeposited, and then they can lend out again, and then redeposited, lent out, redeposited, etc., right? So there'll be a money creation process which is started with the lending of that extra 28. How much money will be created from that initial 28? Well, that depends on the money multiplier process. What is the money multiplier process? In this question, we assume that the currency drain ratio is 0 because we're not given any information about the currency drain ratio. So I'm telling you, if you're not given any information about currency drain ratio, then you just assume it's 0. Okay? So if there's 0 currency drain ratio, what is the money multiplier given by? It's 1 over R. We know what R is. It's 20%. So 1 over 5 is 5. So the money multiplier is 5. So 5 times 28 gives you the total amount of money that would be created. 5 times 28 gives us 140. So it says the total value of additional loans created would be 140. The money multiplier is 5. Okay, everyone happy? Well, I use that term loosely. Okay? So that was where we left it, and now we're going to start talking more about, we're going to move into a discussion about the money market. So we're going to talk about the different components of the money market. So first we begin our discussion with demand for money. So what are the things that influence the demand for money? Well, the quantity of money demanded. In other words, why do you want to hold money? What is your purpose for holding money? Is the inventory of money that people plan to hold on any given day. The quantity of money held must equal the quantity supplied. Ultimately, the quantity of money that people plan to hold depends on 4 factors. So why do we want to hold money? Well, it depends on what the price level is. Number 1, it depends on the nominal interest rate. Number 2, depends on what kind of financial innovation is currently available to us. In other words, are there ways that we can hold money without actually holding money? And number 4, the amount of output that we actually plan to purchase. So how do these things affect the amount of money? Well, first of all, the higher the price level, in other words, if the price level rises, then people are going to want to hold more money to buy the same amount of real goods. Right? If something costs 100 Rand today and we want to buy it, we hold 100 Rand. Okay? If next month it costs 120 Rand, we can't buy it with 100 Rand. We have to now hold more money. We have to now hold 120 Rand if we want to buy that thing. Right? So the higher the price level, if the price level rises, then people are going to want to hold more money. And the point here is, in fact, nominal money. Okay? So we want to distinguish between nominal money and real money. In the example that I just gave you, you hold 100 Rand to purchase one item. I don't know what this item is. It could be anything. It's a water bottle. Costs 100 Rand. Next month, that same water bottle costs 120 Rand. And now, the next month, I hold 120 Rand. Okay? The amount of nominal money I'm holding is different. 100 Rand versus 120 Rand. Are you happy, though, that in both instances, the real amount of money that I'm holding, in other words, the amount of money the amount of things that money can actually buy, the real things that it can buy, is the same? Whether it's 100 Rand or 120 Rand, the real value is the same. Are you happy with that idea? So when we talk about real money supply, so nominal money supply would just be M. Real money supply would be M over P. In other words, once we've adjusted for changes in prices, what is the real purchasing power of our money? Okay? So that's what we talk about when we mean real demand for money. Okay? And the model that we're going to use talks about real money demand and real money supply. Okay? So to give you a heads up on how that would look, if I had 1 trillion Rand in the economy, okay, so the money supply is 1 trillion Rand, and prices increase next month, are you happy that if I did not change the supply of money, there was still 1 trillion Rands worth of money? Are you happy that in the next month, the real money supply has decreased because prices have gone up? Okay? It's an important distinction to make. Real versus nominal. Real money supply changes whenever prices change. Okay? Now, the nominal interest rate is essentially the price of money. I don't know why my pen's doing funny things like that. Price of money. So the higher the opportunity cost of holding money, the smaller is the quantity of real money demanded. Are you happy, therefore, that what we're describing in this discussion here is if we plot nominal interest rates against quantity of money, we would have a downward sloping money demand curve. Are you happy that that's what that statement there says? The higher the opportunity cost of holding money, what is the opportunity cost of holding money? It's the interest rate. The smaller the quantity of real money demanded. Why is it the interest rate? If I hold money, what else could I be doing with my money? I could be investing it. Right? We just saw this in the last question of of this test 1, question 20. If I'm holding money, what am I not doing with my money? I'm not investing it in something that earns a return. You with me? If I'm not earning a return, there's an opportunity cost to holding money. I'm not earning the interest I could be earning. Are you with me? Are you happy that the higher the interest rate is, the higher the interest rate, the higher the cost to me of holding money? Yeah? So as the interest rate goes up, do I want to hold money in my wallet, for example? No, I'm less and less. I want to hold money in my wallet less and less. I'm like, I could be earning a really great interest rate if I just took this money and invested it in some kind of, 6-month fixed deposit or something, right? And remember, when we talk about holding money, we're talking about holding money as in the most liquid thing that it can be. So, on-demand deposits or actual physical cash. Remember, on-demand deposits usually don't earn any interest rates. South Africa, we're different, actually. South Africa, you can earn a very small interest rate on a demand deposit. It's not like that in just about anywhere else in the world. You don't earn any money on a call deposit. You don't earn an interest rate at all. Okay, so very short-term deposits, cash, you earn no interest rate. There's a cost to holding that. So the lower the interest rate, the happier you are to hold cash. Because what's the point in investing it if, you're not really getting a return anyway? Okay. Remembering as well that, I'll come back to a discussion, more a discussion on why that thing is downward sloping just now. Okay, then there's financial innovation. So we know that if we want to purchase stuff at a shop, you can take your debit card and you can just swipe your debit card. By holding a debit card and being able to swipe a debit card, it means you don't have to hold that money in your wallet. You can actually give it to the bank. Okay? So, depending on what the level of technology is or the kind of technology that's available, that influences how much cash you need to have on call. Okay? In fact, you don't even need cash in a call deposit. In South Africa, you could put your cash into something called a money market fund. And a money market fund earns a slightly better interest rate than a call deposit, and you can get your money pretty quickly from a money market fund. And I don't know if you can, but in South Africa, but I'm pretty sure that in the US you can transact directly against your money market account. I'm just not 100% sure of that, and I'm not sure. I don't think we have that in South Africa, which then raises the interesting point: why not? Because we do have money market accounts. Every single major bank offers them, so yeah, I'm not sure why we don't have money market debit cards, essentially. Anyway, okay. But maybe that technology is still coming, in which case you can put your money in the money market. Number 4, real GDP. So why would real GDP matter? Well, obviously the more goods and services we are producing, the more money we need to hold in order to buy those goods and services. Right? The more we produce, the more we are selling, the more we are selling, the more we are transacting with money. Okay? So the more money we need to hold. Okay? So what we're going to have is a downward sloping demand curve like this. Now, I don't think the textbook really gives you a great explanation of this. So what I've got here is just a copy from another textbook of a diagram of why we have that downward sloping demand curve. And then what I did this morning was I just photocopied the pages from this and then made a PDF which I'll put on Sakai. Okay? So there's a PDF that describes what this diagram is showing. And all this diagram is doing is giving you more detailed explanation than what is in this current textbook about why these 4 things here shift or either shift this curve or have result in a downward sloping money demand curve. And what that textbook does is it distinguishes between 2 different types of demand for money: transactions demand for money and an asset demand for money. Okay? So the asset demand for money is the demand for money that is linked to the interest rate. So we hold money not only as something that we want to transact with, but actually also as a form of savings. Okay? And as per the discussion we've just had, the higher the interest rate, right, the higher the opportunity cost of holding cash as a savings vehicle. What we'd rather do is not hold cash, we'd rather hold something else, like a bond in the loanable funds market. Okay? So that's our asset demand for money. Our transactions demand for money, however, is pretty much independent of the interest rate. If you need to buy goods and services, there's a certain amount of stuff that you're going to buy, doesn't matter what the interest rate is, right? The interest rate could be 1,000,000%. If you need food today, you need money today, right? If you're only going to get your money back with a return in 1 year's time, doesn't help you, right? So there's a certain amount of money where it doesn't matter what the interest rate is, you need that money to buy the amount of stuff that you have to buy today. Okay? That is your transactions demand for money, and it's independent of the interest rate. Okay? So when we now talk about real GDP affecting demand for money, what happens? Well, if real GDP increases, if there are more products being produced, more people wanting to buy goods and services, then we need more money for transactions to happen. If GDP increases, your transactions demand for money increases. You got it? Okay? If there's financial innovation that says, you know what, you don't have to hold you don't have to hold cash. Instead of holding cash, you could invest your cash in a money market and then use like a debit card against your money market fund. Okay, that's the kind of innovation that would do what to your transactions demand for money. Let's say there was an innovation, a product that says you don't have to hold cash. You can put your cash in a money market fund where it earns a return. We will give you a card. It's like a debit card. And as soon as you want to buy something with your debit card, you just swipe your debit card. And as soon as you do that, that's an instruction to your bank to sell out of your money market and transfer money to the person you want to purchase stuff from, right? What would that do to your transactions demand for money? Would you need to hold money for transactions? No, you could just invest it. When you needed it, you just swiped your card and then you'd get it, right? So in that kind of technical innovation, what would that do to your transactions demand for money? Shifted which way? To the left. You happy with that? Yeah?
So these four things that affect the money, do they all shift the curve except for the interest rate?
Good, excellent question. So the price level, changes in the price level, okay, are not going to affect your real demand for money. You get that? It's not going to shift your money demand curve, right? In other words, back to our initial example, we had a water bottle. It was 100 Rand, okay? The water bottle then changes to 120 Rand. I still want to buy that water bottle, right? If I hold 100 Rand, that's my nominal money demand. I can't buy that water bottle with 100 Rand, so I need 120 Rand to buy that water bottle. That's my nominal money demand. The price level changes my nominal money demand. But in both instances, I'm buying one water bottle. The amount of money, the real money that I'm holding, remains the same. Do you get what I'm saying? My real, sorry, not my real money holdings. The real money that I demand. In other words, I need enough money to buy a water bottle. That's what I need. That's my real money demand. In both instances, my real money demand is enough to buy one water bottle. Regardless of the price doesn't change my real money demand. Doesn't shift money demand when it's real. Real money demand. So when we talk about the money market, we're going to talk about real money demand. A change in the price level does not affect real money demand. It does affect real money supply. Okay? But we're talking about demand. You get the difference? Right? Remember I said if you have 1 trillion Rand today and the price level changes, that affects the real value of that money. The real supply of money has changed when the price level changes. My demand for money has not changed, though, if I want to buy a water bottle in both instances. My demand for real money. In other words, the money that's going to purchase me real goods and services. Okay? So I'll show you once we get a diagram what that means practically in terms of the diagram if prices change. Okay? Price level changes does not affect real money demand. Nominal interest rates changes does not shift money demand. If you have a nominal interest rate change, what do we have? A movement along the curve, because the nominal interest rate is the price, and whenever price changes, you have a movement along. Financial innovation and real GDP, however, do shift money demand. Okay, so let's just write that there. Shift. Okay.
But it says that, sorry,
Yeah.
it says nominal price level. Does that,
Well, the price level is always nominal.
so when you shift the curves, it's nominal.
Sorry, I don't understand the question. Run by me again. What?
If it's not real, it's nominal.
Yes.
It doesn't shift.
If what is not real, if what is nominal, if what is shifting the curve. Okay, so price level, price, P, by definition is nominal. Okay? The only way you can have real prices is if you're comparing prices in two different periods, right? And you adjust the prices in one period for any change in prices so that the prices themselves then remain fixed and constant, right? Then we can compare real quantities, right? Because the price level is fixed. But the price level itself is a nominal variable. That's by definition what a nominal variable is. It's something that is measured in terms of the price, right? Nominal is when the price is not real. It's measured in terms of the medium of exchange, basically, the unit of account, sorry. So no shift in real money demand. Okay. Was it a question? No. So we can see that the transactions demand for money will shift when you have changes in financial technology or in real GDP. And then what that textbook does is it just adds the transactions demand and the asset demand to get the total demand for money. You'll see that they have a vertical money supply curve, and we'll come back to that later. So the demand for money curve. The demand for money is the relationship between the quantity of real money demanded and the nominal interest rate when all other influences on the amount of money that people wish to hold remain the same. It's a negative inverse relationship. Money demand is downward sloping. So this is the nominal interest rate and this is the real quantity of money demanded. Shifts in the demand for money curve. A change in real GDP or financial innovation changes the demand for money and shifts the demand for money curve. As I say, I think that other textbook just illustrates that slightly better, and I have put up the photocopy of a couple of pages there if you want to go and read that. I think it adds value. It's up to you. What about the supply of money? Well, surprise, surprise, we have a supply curve that's upward sloping. I said in this diagram the money supply curve is in fact vertical. Here you can see the money supply curve is upward sloping. The difference between an upward sloping money supply curve and a vertical money supply curve just has to do with whether you want a model where vertical money supply curve means that the central bank essentially controls the entire money supply. Upward sloping is when the central bank and the banking system controls the money supply. And it's usually just easiest to say, well, assume that the central bank controls the entire money supply. And if we assume that the central bank controls the entire money supply, we have a vertical money supply curve. And you'll see in chapter 31 on page 704, that's eventually how they just draw it anyway, with a vertical money supply curve. Okay? So whether the supply curve is upward sloping or vertical is largely irrelevant for the discussions that we're going to have. And ultimately, we're just basically going to plot it vertically sloping anyway. But why would it be upward sloping? Why would we expect it to be upward sloping? The quantity of money that can be created by the banking system depends on the money base and the money multiplier. And, okay, sorry, there's no discussion here. I thought there was. The money supply, if it involves the banking system, says that when the interest rate goes up, banks are interested or are happier to create more money. So the higher the interest rate that they can loan money out, the happier they are to loan money out. So the higher the interest rate, the more money they will end up lending to people. Which means as the interest rate goes up, so the amount of money supply will go up as banks lend money to people. Okay? So that's the idea with a upward sloping money supply curve. If we then bring money supply and money demand together, yeah?
So we're trying to assume that as the multiplier increases, so does the quantity of renewable money supply.
Yes. If the money multiplier were to change, you would have an increase in money supply, but it would mean that at any given interest rate, more money could be supplied if you got a money multiplier process. So in other words, if the Reserve Bank were to change the required reserve ratio, let's say it lowered the required reserve ratio, that would increase the money multiplier, that would shift money supply to the right. So how do we determine the interest rates? You've got money supply, money demand, where they intersect. You know, same old story, right? And we've seen this before. So this is our equilibrium where our money demand and our money supply are equal. Leading on from the question from that gentleman over there, what happens when we have monetary policy actions? Okay. The example there was expansionary monetary policy means a shift in the money supply curve to the right. That would be expansionary monetary policy. And the example there was the Reserve Bank decreases the required reserve ratio. Okay? If it decreases the required reserve ratio, that increases the money multiplier. It means that banks can supply more money at any given interest rate. In other words, the money supply curve shifts to the right. Okay? So, if the Reserve Bank, for example, was holding... Let's just read through the points here. With a surplus of money holding, people enter the loanable funds market and buy bonds to attempt to get rid of the extra money they are holding. This raises the price of a bond and lowers the interest rates. Okay? What are they describing here? They're describing the following. Let's say that our money supply curve did shift. We went from MS0 to MS1. Okay? This was our initial equilibrium point. Call it A. We need to move down to point B. If we look at the interest rate that would bring equilibrium at point B, right, it's much lower than the 5%. In other words, the interest rate has to decrease. But if we look at the current interest rates with an increase in money supply, what has happened? At current equilibrium interest rates at point A, once our money supply curve shifts, given our equilibrium interest rate, the supply of money is greater than the demand for money. The quantity of money supplied is greater than the quantity of money demanded. Are you happy with that? So what drives down interest rates? Okay? So this is what it's describing here. if the money supply increases, but people don't want to hold all that money, the quantity of money demanded is much lower than the quantity of money supplied. What do people do? Well, in other words, they've been given money, money has been injected into the system, people are holding money, and they don't want to hold it. So what do they do with it? They can invest it, right? And when we say invest, let's be careful of our terminology. So what do we mean by that? They will take their money and they will convert it into savings in, for example, the loanable funds market. Right? So they will take money out of the money market and they will rather put it into the loanable funds market. Okay? To be invested. How do they put it into the loanable funds market? In other words, what happens in the loanable funds market? There is an increase in the supply of loanable funds. Right? Increase in the supply of loanable funds. What does that mean in terms of the bond markets? We haven't actually discussed the bond market, but you can imagine a bond market like any other market. You've got demand and supply, upward sloping, downward sloping, and you've got an equilibrium price for bonds. Okay? If people are going into the loanable funds market because they want to invest, what would they be doing? They would be buying bonds. Okay? If they're buying bonds in the bond market, what happens to demand for bonds? Demand for bonds increases. When demand for bonds increases, we have this normal story where you've got demand, quantity of demand greater than quantity of supply. What's going to happen to price of bonds? Price of bonds goes up. What do we know about the price of the bond relative to an interest rate? When the price of bonds goes up, what happens to interest rates? In other words, what happens to return on bonds? Goes down. Okay? So in the bond market, the price of bonds goes up, the return on bonds goes down. In the loanable funds market, supply of loanable funds increases. What happens to interest rates in the supply of loanable funds market? If supply increases, quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. What happens to interest rates? They go down. Money market as well. Okay? What happens? Interest rates go down. As people start buying bonds, interest rates are driven down. As interest rates are driven down, what happens? Well, the quantity of money that people are prepared to hold slowly increases, and the quantity of money that's supplied into the money market, what happens is people are buying bonds, and the interest rate starts decreasing. Well, the quantity of money supplied starts decreasing. Quantity of money supplied starts decreasing. Why? Because obviously banks, as the interest rate decreases, are banks happy to lend the same amount of money? No, they start pulling back loans. They stop extending loans, right? So the money supply starts decreasing as the interest rate falls. Then there's this kind of cryptic statement over here. It says, when the inflation rate equals the expected inflation rate, and when real GDP equals potential real GDP, the money market, the loanable funds market, the goods market, the labor market, they're all in long run equilibrium. We haven't even discussed vaguely what that could possibly mean, a long run equilibrium. But it does give you some indication, this statement, that we are going to tie together the money market, loanable funds market, goods market, labor market. We're going to bring all of those things together. We haven't got there yet because we haven't even spoken about the goods market. We haven't spoken about aggregate demand or aggregate supply yet. Okay? When we speak about aggregate demand and aggregate supply, we'll talk more about the long run, and then this statement will make a little bit more sense. But for now, you can read that and you can say, oh, okay, that must be true, is all you can get from that statement at this point. Okay? We will put it all together and you will see that that must be the case. But for now, you can just take it as, oh, obviously that must be the case. And then we have something called the quantity theory of money, and then we've got a question, but I'm just not sure how much time we've got left. 5 minutes. Okay. So we've described the money market We've spoken about what an expansionary monetary policy action might look like in this money market. I still want to talk about how a change in the price level will affect the money market. I don't want to do that right now. What we'll do is we'll start tomorrow just finishing off like that. Okay? What the chapter ends with is a discussion on the quantity theory of money, which is now nothing to do with the money market. Okay? So we're going to put the money market aside for a second. We'll come back to it tomorrow. Talk about the quantity theory of money. I'll leave you with this question, and then we'll start tomorrow again with this question. Okay? Quantity theory of money, it's very simple. It's a theory that says if we take the price of all goods and services as an aggregate, so an aggregate price level, multiplied by the amount of goods and services sold as an aggregate, right? So real GDP. Take the value of real GDP, you multiply it by the price level, so this would just be nominal GDP, okay? So in other words, the value of nominal GDP must be equal to the nominal value of money supplied times what we call the velocity of money. The velocity of money is the number of times any given piece of money gets used in a transaction. Okay? So in other words, if the nominal value of GDP in 1 year was R1,000,000, okay, and each little bit of money, each note, right, each coin, on average, was used 10 times in the economy. So I use it, I give it to you, you take it, you use it, you give it to someone else, they give it to someone else, etc., right? Goes 10 times. If the amount of money on average circulates 10 times, okay, so the velocity is 10, and the nominal value of money, not nominal value of money, if the nominal value of GDP is 1,000,000, what must the money supply be? The nominal money supply. $100,000. Yeah? It must be 100,000 is the theory. Because all transactions happen with money, therefore, if you know the nominal value of transactions and you know how often money circulates, how many times money will circulate, then we know how much nominal money must be in the economy. And in fact, if we take that calculation, the same equation, we can rearrange it and say the real value of output must be equal to the real value of money times the velocity of money. Sorry, that didn't work very well. Okay? So, if we know, for example, that the price level is 100, okay, then if our nominal money is 100,000 and the price level is 100 and the velocity is 10, what is the real value of output? In other words, how many units of goods and services were sold? What quantity? Are you happy with that? 10,000 units at 100 Rand per unit will give you R1,000,000 nominal GDP. You can do that equation either way, it's going to work. So that's basically what the quantity theory of money tells us, and that's what these statements over here, these bullet points are explaining. So then there's a question, what is the quantity theory of money? This question regards statements about the quantity theory of money, and we'll start with that tomorrow. So recap quickly the quantity theory of money, and then show what happens when there's a price level change in the money markets. Okay, otherwise, if you've got any questions, come down. I'll see you tomorrow.